Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport in right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. Well, hello there, all you fantastic space monkeys. Welcome to episode number 193 of the Cycling in Alignment podcast. That seems like a really big number. I can hardly believe it. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with Dr. Mike DeBord from B3 Sciences, and we're going to talk about BFR, or blood flow restriction training, and all the amazing and spectacular things it can do for you. I've been using BFR training for about 2 years consistently, and I've dabbled in it previous to that timeline, and I found it to be a highly effective means of strength and conditioning. For me personally, it has become exceptionally time efficient and effective. Dr. Michael and I will unpack some of the reasons why BFR zeroes in on maximizing the signal for anabolic change or stimulus in the body while minimizing the fatigue or cortisol load, especially that we get as endurance athletes, riding our bikes around for hours on end, going up and down all the hills or battling all the winds, depending on where you live. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this conversation. One brief note. If you would like to purchase a pair of B3 Sciences BFR bands, you can do so at my affiliate site, which is colby.b3sciences.com. That's colby.b as in boy, 3 as in the number 3, and you use the numeral, sciences.com. This is an affiliate link, and I do make a commission from this. So to be transparent, I would only ever recommend things to my clients or use an affiliate link for a product that I completely believe in myself and also use myself. And this is the case. I'm not going to be up here selling you a bunch of junk or trying to get you to buy a bunch of crap. That's not the way I operate. When my head hits the pillow, I have to fall asleep with a good conscience. And the only way to do that is to authentically represent products that I will use and that my clients will benefit from. So be assured that this is an authentic recommendation. I'm not just asking you to buy stuff randomly. If you prefer to buy it without the link, of course, you can just go to b3sciences.com. That's okay too. I'll give you this link at the end of the show also in case you want to follow up. But one more time, because you're supposed to do it in triplicate, it's colby.b3sciences.com. And this is a way for you to support the podcast and support my efforts to educate people about all the things that I think are important. So as always, I'm grateful for those of you who have contributed to the podcast. And if you elect to purchase some bands, I am also grateful for that. Be advised that on the B3 Sciences website, there is a tremendous database of information, including sections under health and the various benefits that BFR can give you. There's also a science section that's quite extensive, and it's got quite a bit of info, including so many studies done on BFR. Blood flow restriction has been around for many years in the sporting community. So if you've never heard of it and you're wondering where this came from, it just hasn't quite infiltrated cycling yet, but it is beginning to. That's the scoop. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Mike DeBord. Welcome, everyone, to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. Thanks for joining us. Today, I'm here with Dr. Mike DeBord. Dr. Mike is from B3 Sciences, and he's going to teach us all about BFR, or blood flow restriction training, which is a method that some of you probably know about and many of you probably don't. And there's a lot of science to discuss today. We're going to talk about blood flow restriction training and how it can help endurance athletes balance out their hormones, their metabolism, get a lot of benefit, but with a minimization of exercise fatigue and stress. So I've used BFR myself for about 2 years now. I'm completely sold on it. I have a pair of B3 bands right here on my desk. I use them at least once a week. I take them with me on the road. We'll get into all those details later, but Dr. Mike, start us off. Tell us a bit about yourself. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks, Colby. Well, I think the best place to start is, I was a sports chiropractor. I've got a history of injuries and, competition and fun things, up to where I'm at now. But let's talk about how do we find this? In 2014, the Japanese athletes appeared to be dominant in certain sports. And these sports were similar to what a lot of your listeners, speed skating, swimming were a couple of these sports. And my friend, Dr. Jim Stray Gunderson, who, by the way, was head of the doping committee at that time, is trying to figure out what these Japanese athletes are doing. And they, thought, well, maybe it could be chemical, but all the tests came back. Well, he sees a tent that these athletes are in, and it's kind of closed off. It was real secretive. And he poked his head in there, and they had these, he didn't even know what they were, but they had these things around their arms and legs. Come to find out, he met Dr. Sato, who's a Japanese doctor who had discovered this in the 60s. And from about early 2000s to when Jim found it, they had perfected it. They were light years ahead of us, not only as a athletic community, but as a population in this technology. And here's the real simple way to understand it for an endurance athlete. Everybody knows what altitude training did to your sport. You go up to altitude or you simulate it with an oxygen mask and you get less oxygen. Well, that enhances or increases the fatigue that you can get from exercise. Well, imagine if you could do altitude training, but not through your respiratory system, right in the muscle. Well, the muscle doesn't breathe like your lung does. But guess where it gets its oxygen from? It gets it from the blood. So what if we could take that oxygen and cut it in half in the muscle? Well, a Japanese doctor figured out blood flow restriction. Now, restriction, everyone, means slowing it down. Real quick, if you hear somebody talking about occlusion training, that's your probably first indication they're not very knowledgeable in BFR, because occlusion is to cut off a blood pressure cuff. What we do with BFR is we take this in and out flow, is we want to allow the arterial inflow, not disrupt it, because that can be painful and in some cases not safe, but we want to take this outflow and we want to simply slow it down. Everybody look at my hand. Here's normal. Here's blood flow restriction, still moving. Here at the heart, no change in flow. Here at the brain, we've got 100-year-olds doing it, senior citizens doing it. So it's safe, but the secret is if you slow that blood flow down, you bring the oxygen down. And then we'll get into why that gives you a significant biological advantage. So that, in summary, is blood flow restriction.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I've been reading quite a bit recently about these devices, NIRS devices, which are devices that use light spectrums to measure blood oxygen levels in the muscle tissue. And the concept they talk about is supply and demand, right? And they can watch as an athlete starts to exercise, the demand for oxygen goes up. And so the supply is dependent on how effective your cardiovascular and respiratory system deliver O2 to that blood, to the muscle. And so we can think about BFR as interrupting that chain of supply and demand, or increasing reducing the supply. Well, it's not really the supply, because that'd be outgoing. It'd be the thing about O2 and CO2 that I understand, and please comment on this, Dr. Mike, is that it's like a good analogy is that people tend to focus on O2 delivery, which is, of course, is important, but CO2, the expiration of CO2 is what completes that cycle. So I think of it as when you're at the airport and the train comes to take you to the terminal and it's full of people, completely full and you're like, uh-oh, how am I going to get on this train? I got to get to my gate and catch my flight. Well, in Denver, what they do is they open the other doors on the other side of the train and they say everybody has to get off because they're at the terminal and they have to go get their luggage. They just arrived. And now the train's empty. So now all the outbound passengers can get on the train. But if the doors opened and no one got off the train, then nothing can happen. That system will be clogged. So there's this reciprocal relationship between CO2 and O2, and those have to be kind of 1-to-1. Probably that's probably not technically correct, but conceptually, an analogy, that's what we're kind of thinking about. And so BFR would interrupt the venous return, and so it would actually produce a high CO2 environment, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and the simple term is hypoxia. So real quick, for all the people listening, you're not going to use this when you compete. That wouldn't make sense, right? Right. When are you going to use it? What's the whole goal? My understanding, and you guys take it to a different level. But look, here's the understanding. For every time you bring oxygen in, you're trying to create output. That's happening in the mitochondria, right? You're out cycling and you're breathing and you're bringing in oxygen and you're creating ATP. Then we'll talk about it in a minute. You switch over and you start producing lactate, and that actually becomes another form of energy. But hypoxia, right? How well do your mitochondria function when the demand on oxygen exceeds the supply? You're breathing heavy, trying to keep your muscles going, your slow twitch, and your mitochondria have to pick up the pace. How do you train that? Well, we know altitude training, volume, all the things you guys do. Here's something that if you're not doing BFR, you're not doing. Biological training, I call it. Not with volume, not with load, not with repeated hill climbs, but biologically. What do I mean? It's being able to put your slow twitch muscles in a oxygen deficit environment, which is then you got to clear the CO2. But it's being able to put it in it without overloading it. That's number one. And then what if your mitochondria, you could put your mitochondria in a faster or more intense hypoxia than it's used to. Your mitochondria have to adapt. See, we just think endurance training, right? You build up, you build up, you build up. Okay. What are you doing? You're challenging your mitochondria. Look at the chart, the graph. Okay. And your mitochondria get used to that. So you got to figure out all these ways to keep pushing. Here's BFR on your mitochondria. It's like a hockey stick. Its hypoxia is so fast. This is one of the components. So fast, your mitochondria under oxygen stress, they have to adapt biologically. So it's a different way to trigger your mitochondria. I'll give you a quick example, and Colby will share with you. You put the BFR bands and you start riding, and you're in the burn really fast. I mean, right now. So you're ramping up the hypoxia faster than you could possibly do with traditional training, right? This is one of the concepts of why it works. What does that do? It stresses the mitochondria and they go through mitochondrial adaptation, right? So that quicker ramp up of hypoxia, that's a different biological trigger. And then here's one that nobody knows about. Lactate, okay? Being able to use lactate to trigger your mitochondria to adapt. Well, you guys all know when you get riding and you start feeling the burn, you know that you guys, especially endurance athletes, you use lactate for a third form of energy, right? So that it gets cleared through the inner lactate shuttle. But so the mitochondria are learning to use lactate produced from your fast twitch muscles as a third form of fuel. So they got to clear the lactate. What if you make your mitochondria do that? Put them under more stress and lactate. That's also what BFR does. So you put the bands on and you're riding and you're in the burn really fast. And the ramp up of lactate comes way faster. And you can actually stay in that high lactate. We'll talk about why longer. Here's another biological stimulation to your mitochondria. Forcing more lactate and creating that conversion of lactate to fuel, stressing that so that it becomes more efficient. What's the end result? Colby will tell you, most people that add BFR, you don't replace all your training. You add it in strategically. It takes your endurance and your power. It's a new stimulation. And just like with altitude training, it takes you to new levels of power endurance. Most people start seeing changes pretty quick, right, Colby?
Yep. The interesting thing about BFR, though, is it's incredibly time efficient. So one thing I want to clarify is when I use BFR, and I think, Dr. Mike, most of the time you probably recommend it, that people use bands on all 4 limbs. So you can see Dr. Mike's got his bands on now on the arms, and you put them proximal to the trunk. You put them as high on the limb as you can. So really up in your armpit on the arms and right up in your groin on the legs. And I use all 4. And the reason is we get both local adaptations to the muscle trying to solve that equation of that hypoxic environment, but also we get a global stimulus of lactate that spikes more quickly. So that's what you were talking about when you start riding, or I use the bands mostly off the bike, actually. And I do a series of exercises that involve body weight, things that use both limbs, right? So a push up to low squat would be one example. I do a lot of crawling exercises and a lot of exercises that involve crawling derivatives or crawling themes or changes. And that helps spike lactate really quickly. But when we do that, we get a global lactate response. And that's what you want. You want to ramp that lactate rate very quickly because, as I understand it, the two things that really give us that mitochondrial stimulus and also that hormonal stimulus that we want, that anabolic stimulus, is the low oxygen environment and the high lactate environment. And so the bands are very time efficient because they ramp both of those very, very quickly. You can be like, I've not used a lactate meter, but based on sensation, I'm quite certain that my lactate levels are very high in the first minute, and they're really high within 3 minutes of a set of this. And there's some things you learn when you start to work with the bands on how to get that ramp rate to what exercises do I do first in the set. I'm kind of want to front load it. And then I want to swim in that lactate, so to speak, and force my system, as you were mentioning, to process lactate and still work in that high lactate environment. And then when I get on the bike and I go hard, it's like the volume just goes down on all the hard efforts because my system is acclimated to working in that high lactate environment. High lactate levels are one of the things that turn up the volume on the sensation so much in your own world, right? And they make going hard on a climb so painful and make your world kind of tunnel vision. And when you've trained that system, the volume goes down and you've got more RAM or bandwidth to solve problems, shift gears, go around corners effectively, make tactical decisions, or just process where your intensity really is. So when I say time efficient, what I'm saying is when I started out, I was putting the bands on and I would start the timer when all the bands were on and inflated correctly. They're pneumatic. These bands are pneumatic, so they allow you to precisely tune how much load you're getting on the system. And once I had that dialed, I would start the timer. Initially, I was doing 16-minute or sometimes 20-minute sets. And then I did a webinar with you, Dr. Mike, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And I started thinking about this. And you were talking about how you want to actually kind of trim that down. And I also refined the exercises that I was doing. Now I'm usually doing 8 minutes. I get plenty of load. Like, it translates to at least a 45-minute gym session in terms of load for me, but with less soreness the next day. That's the magic. So I can go out and ride the next day and not feel obliterated, not feel like my legs have so much soreness that I can't do any productive work on the bike. I'm just sort of plodding along, trying to fake it, you know? So the stimulus I feel is about the same, but the damage is less. And so that means I can either increase the frequency of training, or if you're me, you just take more rest during your week and then you show up to workouts more fresh. That was a lot. So I'd love to hear what you think about all that stuff.
Well, we've just kind of hit on 3 things. One, okay, we're going to do it faster. Okay. Anytime you take load off, you're going to reduce cortisol, you're going to increase recovery. Okay. That's part of the equation, right? So everybody think there's 2 sides of creating a positive adaptation biologically. Create the fatigue. Now, everyone, what's the stress score? right? Because there's always a stress. If you create an 8 positive anabolic environment, hypoxia and lactate, and a 7 fatigue, you ended up with 1, you're +1. Okay. So at your athletic level, Colby, he's not going to get, he can go get any fatigue he wants. All of the listeners, right? So let's keep the same 8 fatigue, but we're getting a 2 or 3 stress to get it. He's doing it in 8 minutes. Okay. Getting the same lactate dump, the same hypoxia, right? With less stress. So that's number 1. Keep that in mind when we talk about the score. Okay. Number 2, your biology, right, is going to basically say, do I need to go in survival mode or do I need to go in adaptation mode? What's survival mode? You're in the ice bath the next day. You got the Normatec boots on, right? You're drinking baking soda water or whatever you guys do. That's called survival mode, right? If you feel yourself going into survival mode, you got to ask yourself, am I moving forward in adaptation or am I just surviving? A lot of you are plateaued, right? Even when you push harder, you don't go anywhere in power, right? Because when you push harder, you just bring stress in the workout with it. Okay. And then number 3, right? Number 3 is creating a stronger amplitude, which we just talked about. Now let's wrap all that up. Okay, so Colby can go out, he can strength train for 45 minutes and do his circuit, and he can go get an 8 fatigue, but he's probably going to get a 6 or 7 stress with it. Okay, now he switches over to BFR, and we'll go back into biology in a sec, gets the same 8 fatigue, but his biology is going, dude, you didn't stress me. Oh my gosh, you didn't overload me. You didn't beat me up. You didn't kill me for 45 minutes, right? And then the stress score, let's call it a 3. Just do the math. 8 minus 6 is a 2. 8 minus 3 is a 5. You're creating adaptative anabolic energy, IGF-1, mitochondrial adaptation, right? You're creating this energy in your body that goes towards either moving forward biologically or maintaining, or sometimes you'll notice you overtrain and you lose power in VO2 max and you got to back it down. So BFR allows you to flip that equation. Go get all the fatigue, light stress. What's the result? You are more dominant in your anabolic system. Your growth hormone is more dominant. Your IGF-1's more dominant. Your recovery is more dominant. You are biologically telling your body, go into adaptative mode, not survival mode. That's what BFR does. And Colby will hit it right on the nose. I'm fresher. I recover faster, right? I can train more often at the Olympic level. Now, I'm not talking amateur. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm talking Olympic level. We certainly didn't go into the Olympic athletes and get more fatigued, right? They'll throw up or pass out to get the fatigue. We just reduced the stress they were getting and made it more efficient. So they recover faster, have less injury, and can train more often. And that's one of the huge benefits that athletes that are at the optimum, peak performance of endurance, see when they start doing BFR.
Yeah. It makes me think of the typical psychological drive for an elite athlete, whether that's an amateur or an Olympic level or world championship level rider or endurance athlete in general. Most of these athletes are highly driven, right? Drive isn't the issue. In fact, drive can be a problem because, like you mentioned, they're training so hard and they're building up all this fatigue. So they're constantly hitting that 8 and then they're walking around at a 7 or a 6. And so there's 2 problems there. One is, well, how do we train a little smarter? How do we get the same signal with less fatigue, right? Wouldn't that be clever if we could do that? But the second, more nuanced part of this conversation is actually explaining to some of these athletes that you can separate the signal from the fatigue. They may not understand that or believe it, or even if they understand it conceptually, they may even more insidiously, they may not want to let it go because they're kind of conditioned to walk around in a state of 7 fatigue all the time. When they go up the stairs, their quads hurt. And every time they do that, it's sort of this little comforting signal like, oh, I'm training really hard. I'm making progress. I'm smashing myself and I'm working hard enough. And that means that I'm really care about my sport and I'm expressing my passion, which is expressing your passion in a sport is a great thing. But you don't have to be smashed all the time to make gains. In fact, it may cause you long-term problems like joint problems and hormone problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Pain isn't progress. Pain is basically a byproduct of how hard you pushed your body. But look, I was there. So here's how I separate it for everybody on the call. Let's just leave the traditional system where it's at and let's not change it. We know what it does. Reverse engineer it for a second, right? You want power in your fast twitch muscles, right? You want endurance in your slow twitch muscles, right? Where does that power come from? It comes from hormones, right? Turning on your anabolic system. Your anabolic system is hormones, and it comes from a super efficient cardiovascular oxygen delivering system. Okay. Where does that come from? Well, the power system in fast twitch comes from growth hormone. Okay. Remember, we're going to get to the stimulus in a minute. So we got to drive growth hormone. Okay. Which will give us the IGF-1 and the testosterone. And by the way, the brain derived nootropic factor, keep our thyroid healthy. Right. And the same thing through the cardiovascular system, right? We got to create hypoxia, alpha-induced hypoxic factor or inducible hypoxic factor. That's what triggers the whole thing. Now back up. Where do we get the stimulus? Okay, you get the stimulus from two things, hypoxia, drop in oxygen, and lactate. Okay, you don't get it from fatigue. You don't get it from micro-tearing. Micro-tearing has nothing to do with it. Those are byproducts. Okay. So we are chasing hypoxia in the slow twitch, put more demand on the mitochondria of oxygen than we have available, and then we want to go get the fast twitch muscles and create the lactate. Now let's go look at the stimulus. Here's how to look at traditional. This is the traditional way. Now there's another way that you can do separately, and when you combine the two, give you a perfect example. Mitchell Hooper, world's strongest man. Let's look at a different sport, right? He's doing BFR now. Every workout, he's doing little green tubing, cranking out BFR. No heavy weights. He's maximizing the traditional load training with BFR biological training. Okay? Speed athletes. I take speed athletes and we multiply. We use traditional training and then we add BFR biological. The two add or multiply. That's how all the endurance athletes should look at it. Now, let's really understand what BFR does. You're going to need low days and long rides and heavy weights. Not as much as you think you need, but you still need those. Here's BFR. BFR says it's not about load time or volume. It's about signal. Okay, how do we get the signal? We have to create more demand of oxygen than is being supplied. Without the bands, oxygen's at 10, you got to go to an 11. And you got to stay there. You can't just touch hypoxia. You guys know you got to stay in it, right? Oxygen's a 5. Look, you already got it. You only got to go to a 6 to get the hypoxia. You're doing half the work, okay? So you obviously know the benefits. You've reduced oxygen. You've basically pre-fatigued the muscle. You biohacked, okay? So obviously getting hypoxia is going to be easier and faster. So that's a different way to go get hypoxia. Now look at the fast twitch. You need power, you need strength, you need muscle, right? What do? You do strength training, okay? How do you get the fast twitch muscles and do strength training? You can't curl 3-pound dumbbells. You'll be here all day. You'll be doing thousands of reps and you'll stay in the slow twitch. You have to use load, 70% of 1 rep max or explosion dynamic type work to get the lactate. That's hard, okay? Here's what the new biological exercise system says. It says there's a pathway into your fast twitch muscles that's not based on load. It's based on biology. It's a neural crossover. So your slow twitcher here going into light exercise, calling more oxygen than is flowing, and they start to fatigue. The fast twitch, through a neural connection, see this going on. It's like they're watching, and they say, oh, we better help. Neurologically, the fast twitch jump in and help the slow twitch. It's kind of like when you're biking and then you feel the burn. That's your fast twitch jumping in and helping because you're producing lactate off the fast twitch side. But now you don't have to go punish your body and smash it to get the fast twitch. You're doing a light exercise, the slow twitch or immediate hypoxia. Neurologically, the fast twitch jump in and help. You are now training your fast twitch muscles with a light weight. You're in lactate. So immediately you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to pound and beat my body up to go get the fast twitch, especially if you have an injury. And now all of a sudden, lactate ramps up faster. Here's the next part. You can stay in lactate longer. Let me give you a visual, right? Because lactate is not about how much. Lactate's about how much can you create in a small window. And here's why, and then I'll finish it. You have to exceed lactate threshold to go get growth hormone. What's that mean? Initial lactate gets cleared in the mitochondria. And if it doesn't get created fast enough in a short period of time, it just all gets clear. It never tells the pituitary gland, give me growth hormone. It's called lactate threshold. You guys have probably heard of this. You got to produce enough lactate, at least 5, 10, 15 seconds in a strength training move to get a good signal going, right? Here's what some people do. 1, 2, 3, 4, super heavyweight. 5, 6, 7, 8. There's the burn. 9, 10, stop. And they think, oh my gosh, I micro-teared and I used a heavy weight. Brain doesn't care. Pituitary gland doesn't care. Pituitary gland is paying attention to lactate. You produce 5, 7, 8 seconds of lactate. Maybe enough to raise blood lactate and go get your brain. But you're thinking, oh, I lifted a heavy weight. That's our mentality. Here's BFR, right? I'm not using a 50-pound dumbbell. I'm using a 5 or a 10. So when I get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not enough oxygen, crossover recruitment, fast twitch engage, there's the burn. I'm not going, this is 50 pounds. I only got 2 or 3 more. I go, oh, I can keep going. So I teach you, soon as you feel the burn, stay in it for 30 seconds in a strength training move, which you would never be able to do with a heavy weight. So all of a sudden, you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's the burn. Okay, countdown, 29, 28. Chase burn. Slow down, speed up, doesn't matter. You're producing lactate. And all of a sudden, you're producing lactate like you got 2 people spotting you and they're screaming in your ear telling you to keep going. You're elevating blood lactate. And that's what turns on growth hormone. Load does not turn it on. Micro-tearing does not turn it on. How many reps? Nothing to do with it. It's lactate, but you also got to have the stimulus. And here's what we figured out. The stimulus can be 5 pounds. It can be 50. It's an mTOR mechanical stimulus. Doesn't matter if it was 5 or 50. I'm 62 years old. I'm 195. I got the same muscle I had at 20, and I never lifted more than 7 or 8 pounds in 10 years. Never. Why? Because I know what the signal is. The signal is lactate and, of course, some mechanical tension. So now all of a sudden, you heard Colby say, I'm doing an 8-minute squats, push-ups, right? And he's getting a stronger signal, but he's compressing it. If he took that 8 minutes and he spread it out over 40 minutes, he wouldn't get the same lactate response because his body, he's getting less percentage of lactate, right? Here's another example, right? And I know you guys don't do this, but I got my phone. So here's the average athlete at the gym. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's the burn. Stop. Then they're like, hey, look at me. I'm in the gym, right? Oh, checking my text. And 2 minutes later, they dive back into another set. That's not enough lactate. You're not going to produce enough concentrated lactate. So we teach, go fast, change muscles, get the burn, dive into another group, squats, jumps for your kind of athletes. You're working out 8 minutes and Colby's in the burn 6 out of the 8 minutes. He is getting the strongest anabolic growth hormone signal. And if you measured his growth hormone, it would be off the charts growth hormone. So now he's amping his anabolic signal. And he's not stressing his body. Look at that. That's all adaptation energy he's got to go towards, improvement in what he's trying to achieve. And it happens in every athlete we work with.
Yeah. Yeah. On the other side of that is when athletes really focus on endurance and especially long intervals and long time on the bike, long duration at low intensity, that's orthogonal or counterproductive towards anabolic hormones, right? I mean, cortisol and growth hormone are antagonistic to each other. So when we're swimming in a giant pool of cortisol, because we're doing hours and hours and hours on the bike, that can have a detrimental effect on our anabolic hormones without question. And that might be, in some cases, that might be appropriate or necessary at the professional level. You have to duplicate the demands of your event. If you're racing 300 kilometers and it's going to take you 7 hours, you're going to have to do a fair amount of duration in training. But, that special case aside, for everybody else who treats cycling as a hobby and is also balancing all the things that I'm balancing, which is family and work and home maintenance obligations and, all the things that we have to do in life in our fourth, fifth, or sixth decade. The further you go, the longer that list becomes. Then we get to the point where we have to really be selective about our training time and be smart about it. And so for me, the BFR bands have been a huge blessing because they're so time efficient. There are days where I feel like I literally have 20 minutes to work out, and now I can actually do it productively. There's nothing I can do on the bike in 20 minutes. 20-minute bike ride, it's not even worth putting on your kit and your shoes. It's a waste of time. You're going to end up riding around the block. And to that end, this is the perfect tool to take with you when you travel. If you travel a lot and you're in hotels and you never know what you're going to get, it's like gym roulette, Sometimes you get the rusty exercise bike with a broken seat, and more often you get what I call the modern safety gym, which is like just enough stuff to where they think people can't really hurt themselves. It's like the warrior gym. And I mean, if you're creative, you can do a fair amount with that. But if you have these, none of that matters. All you need is some floor space and the bands, and you can get such an effective workout. So these have been a huge blessing for me in my travel world.
Yeah, like when I go to I travel a lot because I'm always teaching. I hit the stairs, up, down, up, down, up, down. Then I go to push-ups, pull-ups, dumbbells. Then I hit the stairs. So 8 minutes later, I'm cooked. And in 10 years, here's what I can tell you. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not a lab technician, but I've probably seen more than anybody else in BFR, right? Scientists, right? They're in a lab with 20 people. I've seen close to 80,000 people. And here's what I can tell you. Every year, these workouts get shorter and the traditional training becomes less for athletes. Now, I can tell you, everyday people, if you're recreational and you just want to be in shape and ride a bike, you don't need 2-hour training. All you're going to do is put your body in cortisol. A competitor that's got to experience and go out and be able to handle 7 hours, you got to occasionally go get cortisol and do these 2-hour rides. But here's what I can tell you. Has the amount you think you need every year is going to become less with the science we're seeing, because I'm already seeing the graph. So if you think you need to go out and ride 5 days a week for 2 hours to be able to go do a 7-hour ride, here's what I'll tell you. In 5 years, the science is going to tell you only need it once. That's where it's going. I mean, it's all going in that direction. Colby will tell you, every time he's kind of shortened it and got more intense with BFR, he gets fresher and he recovers more, right? And so now what he's telling you is, I'm going to use my long ride strategically to kind of stress myself to prepare me to handle that. But if I want to go get strength and hypoxia, I'm going to do it more precise. I'm going to do that differently. I'm going to use BFR and use short, high intensity, low pressure. I call it low intensity, high signal training. It's precision. And here's what you're going to have to come to grips with. You're not going to be sore. You're not going to need Normatec boots. Not going to be any ice. You're not going to need the baking soda, your water. You're not going to need any of that because you're not going to create this environment that needs recovery when it's all signal and low stress. I mean, when I used to work out, man, it was, I was an endurance at ice, ibuprofen, ice baths. I mean, I don't use any of that anymore because I'm never sore. I never stress my joints with 8-minute workouts, and I certainly never have to grab a heavy weight.
So maybe you can talk a bit about one of the things I learned from your recent webinar that was so useful, Dr. Mike, was this concept of just using the BFR bands for even shorter activations. You said most mornings, first thing you do is flick on the bands and maybe just do a couple laps on the stairs or a little simple exercise. Maybe you just walk for a few minutes. So that would be even shorter duration, like 1 to 3 minutes typically, right? And that gets into the benefits of the nitric oxide effect. Will you talk a bit about that and how that relates to even injury management or prevention?
Sure, but let me give you the big picture, everyone. Fatigue 20 years from now will be the health tool of our society. Just know that. There is no medicine, no gadget, no surgery, no pill that can create in your body what hypoxia can create. There is nothing. There's no semi-glutoid, peptide, machine that can produce lactate and turn on the anabolic signal. This is your body's pharmacy. It's the entire health spectrum. Sure, you got to sleep and eat good, but this is how you live optimally and adapt. So what are you doing with hypoxia, right? The average person, when they do aerobic exercise, they never use more oxygen or demand that more than's being supplied. As soon as you demand more that's being supplied and you create hypoxia, you go into endothelial nitric oxide, T killer cell activation, anti-inflammatory macrophages, opioids and cannabinoids. That's the whole medicine cabinet. It's the whole thing. It's caffeine. It's your caffeine. It's your Tylenol. It's your ibuprofen. It's your garlic to boost your immune system. So what do I call it? I call it an activator, turning on the system. So when I get up in the morning, right, I'm going to go right here. I'm going to do something to my body to demand more oxygen than's available in the muscle, and I'm going to turn all those systems on, right? So I throw the bands on. I'm in my pajamas, just go up and down the stairs, do a wall sit, right? Let me give you some examples of what this would do. I just hit 3 weeks ago, had a lady who had a 9 sciatica pain, okay? Somebody was over at her house getting ready to take her to the ER, said, do me a favor, put the bands on her, tell her to wall sit. And this lady's like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, just do it. She goes up and sits against the wall. Was like, oh my gosh, 10 seconds later, her legs are on fire. I said, give me 30 seconds. Gets done, and she's like, what did you do to me? My pain's a 5 right now. Now, she still has structural problems. We didn't fix her. We just accessed our own pharmacy. That's called endothelial oxide, then an immediate opioid cannabinoid release, right? The T killer cells. Her pain drops, right? Other people say they get up and they put it on, right? Put the bands on, boom, they get an immediate energy kick, right? And now all of a sudden they need half a cup of coffee instead of 3 cups. You'll pay attention to Alcaraz, #1 tennis player on the world. You'll see him walking on the court with the bands on. I got the picture right here. Just assume I got it. I got a picture of Alcaraz. His trainer, he puts the bands on and he's in the tunnel and he's just getting a little pump, and then he takes them off when he gets out there. Nitric oxide, deep blood flow, oxygen into all the muscles, activator, right? So it's a 30-second, get 30 seconds of burn. We call that an activator, right? 5 to 8 minutes, now you're getting into an adaptator. You activated, then you're going to adapt with the growth hormone. 10 to 12 minutes, you're just crushing it. You're pushing your adaptative system as far as possible. So when would you use it? Well, if a increase in quick nitric oxide increases blood flow, how about if we use that after we work out long? After we do a long ride, right? So we do a long ride and we come home and we put the bands on. We do a 30-second wall sit. You take the bands off and you reperfuse all the blood, flushes everything out. There's your Normatec boots on steroids in about 30 seconds, right? Yep. You go to the Philadelphia Eagles training room and you watch a media session. They are all on an exercise bike doing 2 minutes of BFR. By the way, they're using the $5,000 units that are all hooked up electronics. You got these for fraction of the cost, but what are they doing? After they get beat up and pound their body, they're getting a quick nitric oxide release and flushing, rushing all through. Pay attention to Major League Baseball dugouts. You'll start to see pitchers come out of the game, and they'll be in the dugout with a little BFR band going like this if you watch real close. They're not icing their shoulder anymore. They're using nitric oxide and stimulating anti-inflammatory macrophages. So now this becomes an activator, a pre-competition, or a recovery tool, that you can use to stimulate your body. And that's a world that very few people know about, that you're going to get access to when you use the bands. What have you noticed, Colby, when you've done quick activators or little quick recovery 1-2 minute sessions?
I've used them more as activators pre-ride. And I find that for me, in particular, when I use the bands, I'll do like some crawling exercises, like I mentioned. I'll do some stairs, or I'll do some lunges. I do a lot of lunge variations, some with overhead reaches and things like that, lightweight. And when I do that, I get on the bike and I just feel like everything's turned on. Like normally it would take me 20 or 30 minutes to kind of get things going, get the blood flowing, so to speak, sort of remember, be able to feel like I can put power into the pedals. When I use the bands, I get on the bike, and by the time I hit the end of my driveway, I feel like I can just go and hit it immediately. Yep. So everything just turns on. I think it helps for sure at that nitric oxide effect, right? I'm flushing the muscles with blood, but also I think having the compression close to the torso helps me sort of map proprioceptively what the joints are doing and where they are in space. It kind of gives my brain the stimulus that lets me remember how to fire the muscles, kind of clarifies my internal GPS is how I think about it. And that's a really useful way to start the ride, because the thing about cycling is it's a bit of an awkward sport. Like you get on a bike and the bike will let you it'll direct you in certain respects. Like your saddle height doesn't change vertically, right? But your hips can sit sideways. They can rotate in the frontal plane. They can kind of get a little cockeyed. And this is what I see as a bike fitter all the time. People have these rotational patterns that sort of come out. And so a big part of my pre-ride practice is to map the body, map the hips, map the shoulders, connect the shoulders and the chest to the pelvis so I know where they are in space, because those two things can really float around on the bike and get lost. And that is really useful for me I think it's a key aspect of having good posture on the bike and bilateral symmetry, because cycling is a sport that demands a tremendous amount of symmetry from us. And that, I think, has helped me stay injury free, because the more symmetrical you are, or the tighter your movement patterns are under load, then you're putting less stress on the joints, right? In general.
Yeah. And we didn't even talk about injury, right? Being able to come back from an injury or preventing an injury. In 10 years, I think I can remember one time, and I get thousands of calls, everyone. Nobody ever calls me and said I pulled a muscle. Oh, I blew out my knee. Oh, my back. Oh, I flared up my rotator cuff. You can't. If you're doing light exercise and stimulating blood flow and nitric oxide, it's darn near impossible to hurt yourself. You're certainly not going to rip a muscle. You're not going to avulse. You're not going to micro tear, right? You're not going to beat up a joint with load and inflame a joint. So the injury reduction, and that brings up an interesting point for everybody out there that's got young athletes. I want to encourage you to go to our website. Colby will share with you his link. But go into the kids section. And it's interesting. They did a meta-analysis in July of 2025 last year. Means they look at all the science and they pull in the relevant studies. So they pulled in a group of studies on kids 10 to 19 years old. And they said it's more efficient. It does less damage. It's less risk. And in many cases gets better results. More effective. They can get better fatigue. Less injury. Yeah, they're not loading. Less risk, right? And better results. It's more efficient on kids. So that's what we're starting to see. And then you read the studies on seniors. Same thing. Seniors with sarcopenia. We can now, here's what the studies say. We can stimulate muscle hypertrophy in a senior with a load they can tolerate that there's no way they could go use to get. So what are seniors doing? They're just mitigating loss. All they're doing by going to the gym is slowing down the loss. BFR flips the whole table. Says, oh, we can go get muscle. I can't even tell you how many 70-year-old guys have called me and said, dude, I put an itch on my arms in 2 weeks. How's that possible? I said, you're looking at it as if you're 70. There's only one way to look at muscle. Can you get the signal? And if you get the signal, can you do it without the stress? Can you get an anabolic lactate response? Doesn't matter if you're 90 or 9. And now what was the stress score? And if you got kids, I can tell you this. For all you athletes out there have kids, you train them with BFR and it isn't going to be fair to the other kids. I just tell you that right now. I've seen it thousands of times unless they're doing it. Right. And that's kind of like Colby says. Colby knows that he's got a secret that a lot of the biking community hasn't figured out yet. 4 or 5 years, everybody will know it. But right now it's a hack that only a few select people are able to access.
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen a few articles come out about some pros that are starting to use it and figure it out, but it's not widely known. And often when I ask if people know about blood flow restriction training, unless they're in the strength and conditioning world, they often don't know what I'm talking about. So I would agree. It's not widely known in cycling for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of the perfect it's a perfect way to complement endurance training and offset some of the damage done to the hormonal system and the muscular system. Like if people are just riding bikes over a long duration and they're not even in the gym in a traditional sense, their force ceiling is going to slowly decline. Their capacity to build maximum force is going to go down in most instances. Occasionally you get these riders that their phenotype is so fast twitch dominant and they're such natural sprinters that they break that rule. But for the majority of riders, the more you ride, we have this funny colloquialism in cycling. Like people talk about riders being strong, say, oh, wow, she was so strong. He was so strong. And I like to say, cyclists aren't strong. They're durable. They're endurance athletes, but they're really not strong. Most cyclists actually don't even quad dominant cyclists don't have great quadriceps strength typically. You put them in the gym and test it and it's like, whoa, that's not really impressive because they're not performing an exercise that builds a high force ceiling. They're just performing sub-maximal load for long, long durations and often under conditions of high fatigue, dehydration, glycogen depletion, high cortisol levels, low anabolic hormones. They come home from a 5-hour bike ride and their anabolic hormones are flushed. They're gone. So that's not going to build a strong leg. That's not going to build a strong glute, So how do we offset that equation? How do we enter training in that will build strength? Well, the traditional way, like we were talking about, is go to the gym and do a bunch of squats and deadlifts. But the trade, like we've already said, you get a high level of fatigue. And if you're a bike racer who's really an endurance athlete and you go stack a bunch of weights on the rack and try to do a bunch of back squats, the chances of injury are pretty high, actually, unless you've got a lot of proficiency in the gym, or a really good technique coach. But even then, that doesn't solve the fatigue problem. It doesn't solve the damage problem. So BFR lets us get that load to the muscles, but with minimal weight. So the chance of you injuring yourself, like you said, are almost zero. Sure, anybody can screw something up, but yeah. So
yeah, the chances are less. So so all I ask for people is, hey, circulate this, man. Circulate this to the people you care about, especially your fellow endurance athletes. I got a guy who's a triathlete. He's won 81 of 85. He's world famous. And he's figured out how to implement it in. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm fresher, right? You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You go, hey, how can I get more precise, right? In getting the signals I need to be a better athlete, whether it be on the bike. And then think about all the people that you know in your life that don't even get any exercise, that, they're not going to go ride a bike for 2 hours or lift weight for 45 minutes. What if we give them something to do for 5 or 6 minutes? So the ramifications of this across the board, are profound. So it's a great opportunity for you not only to use it yourself, but to circulate this out here with the people you care about. I can't even tell you how many people, I care about that this has changed their life. Geez, just getting them off the couch and getting them some muscle, right, is a game changer for most people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I've got several of my athletes using the bands, and also my stepsister is using them, and she struggled to maintain motivation to keep up with a traditional exercise program. She's been in the, you got to do it for a half an hour, 45 minutes, 3 times a week kind of thing. And to be honest, she's kind of like, it's a bitter pill to swallow. She doesn't really enjoy doing this type of work. And I don't blame her. I don't really enjoy it that much either. As a professional cyclist for years, I kind of did strength training because I had to. And there are ways in which I've learned to love it. Now my relationship with strength has changed. It's evolved. Now I really enjoy it. Using the bands and moving in different ways, that's a great part of my training. I love it. But the point is, like, for my stepsister, she can now use the bands and compress that time window down to 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes twice a week. And she's way ahead of where she was before, which was semi-compliant with a traditional program and had some aches and pains. So we're seeing gains. So that's exciting. It's exciting. It's a great tool for a huge number of people, whether you're an athlete, whether you're athletically inclined or not. It's a great tool. So,
yeah.
Dr. Mike, thank you so much for coming on and telling us all the things, explaining your philosophy on blood flow restriction. I really appreciate it. I'm going to do a separate little outro, and I'll describe how people can find out more about the bands and where they can go. And I'll also describe Dr. Mike Cycle will be in that. And he's got a tremendous amount of resources on there, including free workouts and a huge, really detailed section that has a lot of science, a lot of papers that are directly linked to blood flow restriction and how blood flow restriction can help you in various different aspects of your health. So we'll get to the details on that here in a moment, but just want to let you know that resource is there. And in the meantime, thank you so much, Dr. Mike, for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Cycling Alignment. I appreciate you making time out of your day and educating my audience on this amazing technology.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. It was great to be here. Thank you.
Very well, Space Monkeys. You have reached the end of episode number 193, which is my conversation with Dr. Mike DeBord at B3 Sciences. If you would like the affiliate link website address one more time, that is colby.b3sciences.com. That is Colby, B as in boy, the numeral 3, sciences.com. And as I mentioned in the intro, this is a way to support the podcast and support my efforts to educate people. I'm quite sure you will get enormous benefit from this product, and I'm grateful for your support of my efforts to educate and discuss all the things I've learned in 3.5 decades of bike riding. As always, let us think critically, pedal consciously, and act intuitively. Be well. Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. I will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of Cycling in Alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.